All right, so we are going to begin here with a dashboard that we probably haven't spoken about in quite some time, at least on a public call. And it's all about social metrics, specifically related to social volume, unique social volume. It gets into sentiment here. It has quite a bit of different varieties of offerings that can really enhance your ability to make objective, educated trades. And this dashboard here has multiple ways that it can be mixed and matched and arranged and organized through, of course, date ranges. Right now it's showing 2 years worth of data. We can switch the intervals just like we can on Sandbase to 6 hours, 12 hours, 1 day. We can smooth the line. I won't do that now. It takes a little while to load, but it will basically make estimations in between each point of data to give a more smooth appearance. Many of you understand how this works, but it's actually quite interesting when you're seeing a lot of jagged edges on some of these data points. It can be able to tell a story a lot better for things like weighted sentiment and stuff like that. And then you can, of course, also switch between different sources, because all of our social data is coming from Twitter, Reddit, Twitter, of course, Bitcoin Talk, and then choose between just about any project that is on our platform. Well over 1,000 should be listed here, and they all can give you a distinct story about what is going on with that particular asset. So without further ado, we can look at the social volume here to begin with, and we see basically just an expected fluctuation that trails the price in most cases. Usually right at the all-time high is where a lot of people start to get hyped. You can see quite clearly here in November 2021, there was a huge surge of discussion just on a very small dip where everyone said, oh, well, this must be the dip to get in and ride the wave up the way Bitcoin has been surging the past 2 years. And of course, they were incorrect, and the price continued to drop. You'd see, big spikes on the big plummets, which are no coincidence. It is indicative of people who are polarized and either thinking that Bitcoin is dead or thinking that this is the big dip to buy. The dip buyers here were partially right. We saw a big wave up for a while, followed by some flatness, followed by that big drop once again. And you can notice just recently, just in the past couple days, Bitcoin's social volume has really picked up again. And it's difficult to decipher why. My opinion is that it has a lot to do with the upcoming Fed meetings, because now a lot of people have more or less figured out that the short-term outlook for crypto is very closely related to what's going on with equities and the decisions being made by the FOMC on whether to bump interest rates again in this upcoming meeting. Quite a lot of correlation going on right now. And I think the discussions related to Bitcoin have really heated up as a result of that, because it's certainly not due to price action, which has honestly been going through one of its more boring stretches over the past 2 to 3 weeks compared to the past 8 months, where we've been on this big jagged ride. And, we've had occasional flatness ever since mid-May, but it seems as though people are really beginning to talk about Bitcoin in huge waves right now. And we see the same actually for Ethereum. There has been an uptick. I don't think it's quite as large based on my last check, but there has been a distinct uptick in overall social discussion, and it shouldn't be exclusive to just Twitter. Oh, so I take it back. It's even more of a huge jump. So this is, it definitely is almost above where it was back in the early part of this year when Ethereum was really starting to plummet. But this shows you just how stark of an uptick there has been. And this is, of course, just for Twitter. So it's probably magnified compared to just our total social volume that we can check out on Sandbase, and we can look through that in a bit. So we also have unique social volume while we're sitting here on Ethereum, and it basically looks at only the unique messages. So let's say one account on Twitter is discussing Ethereum, with 10 messages a day or 10 different posts. Normally on social volume, that's going to show up 10 different times, as you'd expect. Every single mention, regardless of the handle, counts as a mention. But here, we're only counting one mention. So similar to token circulation on Sandbase, only counting one unique token at a time, despite wash trading going on between the same token over and over again. This works the same way, where it basically gets rid of all of the excess spam, double mentions, triple mentions, 100x mentions, only talks about the one handles discussion. And obviously, that makes a huge difference, because you can see that the spike here doesn't show up here at all. And that likely means, or I can guarantee you it means, that there are not a significant, there's no significant uptick in people discussing Ethereum. Just the people that are discussing it on a huge repeated basis. It could be due to bot activity or whatnot. It's very hard to say, but this compared to this is really just a massive difference between two metrics, and demonstrates just how different their values are. In a vacuum, I'd argue that this is much more valuable, the unique social volume, compared to regular social volume, because the whole point of social volume, guys, is to really measure how popular an asset is getting amongst people. And when it's just a small group of people who are suddenly discussing the metric 3 times as much, that's not really that useful to us. We want to know that, instead of 3 million people being excited about Ethereum, it's now 12 million people, because that implies that there's going to be some upcoming additional volume. People tend to put their money where their mouths are, not always. Sometimes they just talk about the asset and that's it. But in a vacuum, we'd much rather see a ton of people talking about it, because that's going to increase the chance of a price direction change occurring. And it may not the pattern may not be as stark for Bitcoin and Ethereum, because they're just so huge and there are so many factors that cause price fluctuations. But you can see here, this was a sign, that everyone and their mom was suddenly getting into Ethereum, and it probably wasn't going to go too well. For those who remember 2017 and 18, that, end of 2017, where everyone at the Thanksgiving table was supposedly talking about Bitcoin and crypto again, that was like the mainstream suddenly discovering that crypto can provide crazy investment returns. And as soon as they started to really get in around the holidays, that was kind of the top. And it was pretty similar here, as we can see from unique social volume. Everybody was really suddenly talking about Ethereum almost overnight, in the span of a week, because the Bitcoin all-time high was on the 8th. And it looks like this surge happened about 1 week later, as people were looking at a very small buy the dip opportunity. That, of course, didn't really come to fruition. And the mainstream crowd being in it allowed whales to dump their bags with ease and have plenty of liquidity to do so, sell their, $4,600, $4,800 plus Ethereum at a premium, knowing that they would be able to get it back way later at a lower price, with so many novices and new people coming into the space. Now, pause there for a minute to not only take a drink, but also to see if anyone may have some questions thus far about just the overall premise of social volume and unique social volume. And feel free to chat too if you don't want to talk on the microphone. No big deal to us. We've got a couple staff members in here who are more than happy to read what you ask at any time. All right, no worries. I'm going to keep going. And at any time, just remember, you are more than welcome to jump in, ask questions. So the spam index, while we just stick on Ethereum, I kind of like showing these metrics off on Ethereum rather than Bitcoin because there's a little more variety between hot and cold as time goes on. So the spam index is basically the ratio of social volume to unique social volume and shows how it's basically showing the sudden influxes of multiple duplicated messages from the same accounts. And it's going to look somewhat similar to the overall social volume, especially right now, because we obviously see the big uptick here in social volume, but it's non-existent here. And that's because there were a bunch of spam messages going on just in the past week here. And so that's something to keep an eye on. This isn't going to be a perfect match by any means, but it shows when suddenly bots are getting involved, or it's just the same people suddenly talking about it. And I think that a spike of this magnitude is not responsible for just sudden interest level rate skyrocketing from the few people who were already talking about Ethereum. It's likely people that are setting up some bots to get the conversations about crypto going again. Who knows what that's going to do as far as impact future prices? We might be able to look at a few other asset examples, but it is clearly showing that there's some inorganic discussion about the markets right now that is not natural and not coming from humans entirely. Moving on, so relative social dominance is super interesting. This basically is just taking around 7 or 8 of the top assets and showing in a 100% scenario where 100% is all of this discussion on those top 7 or 8 assets altogether, no matter whether it's a small amount or a large amount, it's always going to equal 100%. And it's comparing how much proportion each asset makes up of that 100%. So over time, we can see Bitcoin, for example, has made up less and less of that proportion. It really peaked in November, December of 2020, where you can see there was, just eyeballing it, it looks like over 70% of discussion at one point was about Bitcoin, and it slowly started to have the gap closed by altcoins, various assets. It lost a significant amount here, and Bitcoin was actually below 30% of all discussions at this time. And it's kind of hovered between 30 to a little over 40% ever since, and is increasing right now, which is typical in bear markets as altcoins tend to get hammered and their prices are hemorrhaging. You'll see people flocking back to Bitcoin, discussing the overall crypto markets, which that conversation usually begins with Bitcoin rather than Dogecoin or a meme coin out there or some sort of S coin that may not be relevant to the overall health of the crypto markets. So that's why Bitcoin is starting to gain a little bit of steam now. You can see that Tether, especially during late May, early June, they really started to see a big rise because of the depegging going on and people wondering whether it was still a viable stable coin. It looks like, as for now, the dust has settled a little bit. You can see Ethereum has had its time in the sun. Binance, Polkadot, Cardano, it's interesting how closely they often fluctuate, as we can see here. It's usually during altcoin surges or during altcoin bloody weeks where there's just a ton of market cap shrinking, one or the other. It tends to spike on these assets when it becomes very polarized in the altcoin markets. So that's a cool way to look at just the social dominance the same way we look at price dominance very often when it comes to Bitcoin versus Ethereum or Ethereum versus Bitcoin and some other comparisons. Twitter follower growth, we can keep this to Sandbase. This is another good one here. So we've talked a little bit about weighted sentiment on previous segments we've talked about, and we'll go over weighted sentiment when we head over to Sandbase soon. But this is basically a glimpse into the back end of how weighted sentiment is calculated. And oftentimes we know that there's a lot of spam going on right now, but oftentimes you'll see a big separation between positive sentiment and negative sentiment, especially when things are going really well, or if people are optimistic about buying a big bounce, what have you. And clearly, the positive sentiment before this huge spam spike happened was really dropping down, while the negative sentiment really wasn't. It's been staying pretty dormant. So the reason we've seen a larger and larger negative sentiment growing over the past few months is due to the lack of positivity and people saying that crypto is still a viable investment on, in this case, Twitter. And this gap closing is actually a good sign. We like to see when people are in serious doubt over Bitcoin or Ethereum or any other asset out there, because that's usually when the biggest price rallies happen without much resistance. On the flip side, when we see negative sentiment without the positive, which I don't see too many occurrences of, honestly, that can be a sign that people are getting too euphoric and believe that crypto is just going to go up forever. And obviously it doesn't go up forever. There are huge waves in prices of assets all the time. And when, like we said, everyone and their grandma gets involved, that usually is a not so great sign that crypto's prices continue pushing. And this is really interesting too. We talk about the spam index. It looks like it's all positive commentary right now, and that's what's contributing to the spike going on up here. Sentiment balance is the difference between positive and negative sentiment. So very simply, that's just subtracting at any given time what this line is versus this line and the gap between them. Obviously, again, with the huge positive sentiment spike, there's going to be a huge gap here going on. Totally makes sense. And now weighted sentiment. So as I alluded to, this is one of our most important social metrics, guys. It's essentially taking the rolling z-score of the sentiment balance right here, so subtraction of positive versus negative sentiment, and then also multiplying it by the amount of unique social volume, which I think is the right way we're doing it. We'd rather see the amount of unique discussions about Ethereum or any asset we're looking at instead of just the overall ones that include spam, because that gives us a more realistic understanding of how each individual thinks about an asset without counting anyone twice. And generally, we're seeing mostly negativity over the past couple of months, going back to mid-May or so, up until this huge spike in spam started. And even though we're looking at unique social volume, which should take out a lot of this inorganic spike, it's still showing that things have moved into positive territory once again, which is interesting. So there is a lot more discussion about both Bitcoin and Ethereum, and to a lesser extent, some other altcoins right now. And there's intrigue on how they're going to be impacted by the next Fed decision. So that is likely causing the uptick in overall discussion. I don't know if it necessarily means that there's a true positive spike right now, because this isn't looking at just unique volume, it's looking at all volume. But either way, we have jumped back into decent positive range for the first time since mid-April, and that's pretty significant right now. So that is essentially a recap of what's going on the graphs.santiment.net/social side. Again, I want to pause for questions really quick, see if any of you would like to clarify or perhaps look at one or two or three assets on this dashboard while we're here. And don't forget, guys, we will have the replay of this webinar go up on our YouTube so you can watch it. Again, if you didn't quite catch an explanation that I gave and want to kind of see it a little slower or laid out in front of you again.
Consider our silence as glowing applause.
That's appreciated. It's whether I'm talking to myself or talking with you guys, I just hope that the stuff that I'm showing here is resonating and making sense. So by all means, don't worry about telling me if something doesn't make sense. I don't get offended or hurt by any positive, negative feedback ever. Don't worry about it. All right, so why don't we look at some of the same stuff we just checked out, but on Sandbase instead. We just looked at Ethereum, so let's mix it up a little more. Why don't we check out something like Cardano, which has gone through a pretty massive slump here. For those of you following the number 8 market cap asset, yeah, still number 8 as of now. It's obviously gone through its share of big spikes because Cardano, despite having a huge market cap, it seems to have a very polarized opinion from the crowd. And there are often huge segments where it's suddenly being talked about, and then it goes back to dormant, almost like just into hiding, where people aren't talking about it much at all. Let me zoom this out to 7 days instead. So this gives more of a smoothed over appearance and gives us an idea of when Cardano is being talked about a lot, as you would expect when prices are absolutely skyrocketing as they were in August 2021, and when it's not being discussed at all, when it's just slowly sliding down in price. You'll see that a lot of people will think there are dip buy opportunities on sudden drops, and they get positive again, and then when it doesn't bounce, they suddenly get negative again. Same here. It tends to be lagging a lot, where you see a big quick jump in price, and then suddenly everyone is euphoric about Cardano again, and then after the price doesn't jump back up the way they expect, right back to negative weighted sentiment. So again, this is combining the unique social volume, so each individual and how much they're discussing it, as well as the ratio between positive and negative sentiment. So we actually have an algorithm that will look at each individual comment and scrape for words like going to the moon versus crypto's a scam versus I can't wait to get my Lambo versus this I never believed in this asset, or it's an S coin, stuff like that. And we'll be able to find through those keywords with a pretty good level of accuracy whether the intent of that comment was meant to be bullish or bearish toward that particular asset. And this is kind of a reflection of the Cardano hype usually not leading to good results. And, we're looking at a short sample size of just the past year, but I could zoom out and probably find some better examples of people getting very negative, like right here, back in September of 2020. Tons of doubt related to Cardano, and then suddenly the price skyrockets and everyone gets euphoric again. Like I said, more recently, people have been negative, and it just hasn't mattered. There have been too many real-life factors that have pushed the price down. But you do see that when there is a big uptick in price, it's usually coming while the crowd is negative. Here too, I'm looking at some other skyrockets. It's interesting here, like they were already positive for some reason. It might have been because it had already increased pretty significantly back in November. So by the time January rolled around, people were already pretty prepared for a big jump, and that's what happened. Let's take a look at another asset, such as a smaller one that doesn't usually get talked about too much. Chainlink definitely gets talked about a lot. Let's try Ethereum Classic, could be interesting. So yeah, this is definitely a good example. Let's look just the last 6 months. It looks like there's some pretty good alpha that showed up for the weighted sentiment side of things. So Ethereum Classic, not a hugely popular asset to talk about on social media unless there's some intriguing price movement or a significant update to the asset itself. You can see when things were very positive at the very beginning of the year, prices were starting to go up. It went down. There was an immediate shift to negativity because sometimes people believe there's going to be a bounce. Obviously, there really wasn't. There was a slow one that occurred about 2 weeks later, but you can see they got super positive after it recovered, and then boom, right afterwards, you see a local top and a big downturn, and suddenly everyone is negative for looks like 5 weeks straight here. And then on the 5th week, we see right at the end of it, a huge surge that blindsided all of the people here. And suddenly we're positive again. Once we get positive, a local top forms, things drop. We got positive still here because people were expecting a dip by opportunity. That didn't work out that time. And then we got into this long lull of negativity for, it looks like 10 or 11 straight weeks. And it stayed here for quite a while because obviously weighted sentiment is not going to be a perfect science by any means. But overall, when you see things in a long stretch of negativity, I can almost guarantee that whenever the price does go up, it's not going to happen when the crowd suddenly gets positive for some reason related to the asset's innovation or anything like that. It's going to happen while everyone is still down on Ethereum Classic, and then suddenly people are going to catch on and go, oh wow, Ethereum Classic is a great asset, I'm going to buy here, right? And then they buy and everyone gets euphoric, and then there will be another drop and rinse and repeat. So that's the general premise of how weighted sentiment works. And again, quick pause here to see if there are some questions about what is and should remain one of our most important social metrics that Santiment offers. And awesome to see that we've got double-digit viewers right now in the webinar. I appreciate those of you who have been part of the long bear market that's been going on for 8+ months, but still come and visit with us for these educational courses that we're doing here. I guarantee that once the prices start to pick up, that's going to it's going to be a much more regular occurrence to see some high numbers in these webinars. So again, appreciate those of you who are with us. Okay, so let's move on to some other social metrics now. Let's again mix it up. Let's look at Polkadot. Could be actually interesting. It's something that obviously is the 12th largest market cap asset. It has plenty of volume and interest all the time, but it gets very polarized depending on the level of excitement the price is producing. So if we go to social down here, you can see all of the various options. We can start with something like Twitter followers, for example, and we can see over time the amount of increases, and you won't really see decreases because Polkadot's definitely a growing asset. Sometimes you'll actually see a downtick in Twitter followers, but this shows over time, exactly as you would anticipate, how many Twitter followers are jumping on to Polkadot's handle. And you'll see periods of flatness, usually when there's a big price downtick, especially near bottoms. And then when prices start to surge, it's no coincidence that Twitter followers tends to blossom. Obviously, we've been seeing quite the downtick, and that's why things have flattened out quite a bit. If there's a particular flattening like we see here, that can usually be a sign of things really being ready to rip, because those are correlating with negative sentiment periods, and that would make sense why what was going on at the very beginning of January of 2021. So this could be another way to supplement and just understand the trust level that the community has with the associated asset, because they're going to be interested in the asset if they trust it. Sometimes just because they want to follow along with the news and they're not even investing in it at all. That happens all the time. But to a large extent, these are reflective of interested investors for the asset. And when it's surging, that means that the amount of interested investors is going up. So when it's really surging like this, that's the sign of basically another way we can look at the interest in the mainstream and how much they want to be involved in the asset. And we don't want to see the mainstream get involved in the asset. Those are what lead, those periods of time are what lead to local tops, like we saw obviously in November, and this happened because of mostly Bitcoin's local top and then its big drop, but it's still very relevant for many altcoins, and they're not all going to look just like this. So it can be a very nice way to supplement your social strategy there. Another one we can look at would be social volume AI could be interesting. I want to make sure to pull up the explanation for social volume AI because it's complicated and I don't want to give any incorrect info here. Here we go. So social volume on the Santiment Academy. I know that we have a segment on AI somewhere, but it may not be on our Academy page. For those staff members who are here with us, if any of you have the definition of social volume AI, I'd love to read it to the attendees here. So if one of you can find that and potentially link it, that would be amazing. But for now, I will leave this alone. I know it is similar to social volume, but it takes into account some other implied findings in order to give a good presumption about how many people are truly interested in an asset at any given time. We can also look at active social users on Telegram, which is similar to Twitter followers. It's going to basically tell us how many people are in those rooms related to Polkadot at any given time. And look at just how much this fluctuates with price levels. It's pretty shocking. You can see sometimes a big uptick in the Telegram rooms before like a secondary pump, and they come in on the first pump. And it's interesting how they dropped right before the price took off. Same up here. This happened right after, literally right after the big surge up to $45 or so. And then they were getting in, they were basically all chatting, and the rooms were filled with great discussion about Polkadot right at the local top. And then the price drops and you see the lagging result on the amount of active users in the Telegram. It really divots hard here until there's a bottom, and then suddenly people get interested in Polkadot as the price rises once again. So this really illustrates just how much people tend to be followers of the price rather than anticipators, if that makes sense. As of now, you can see it's pretty much at rock bottom over the last 3 years. There's almost no interest in Polkadot, relatively speaking, with only 399 active users as of now, when we were at a peak of 34,000 plus. I mean, we're talking about 100 times almost the amount of users just, 9 months ago, 8 months ago, compared to now. Insane. NFT social volume, I mean, it's pretty in the weeds. It's basically related to NFTs that are associated with the asset. Trending words rank. So this is how often words that are associated with Polkadot are jumping onto a top 10 trending word in our countdown, which I'll show you in just a moment. The higher it gets, obviously, that's going to be more associated with local tops. It looks very noisy. I can get it to 7 days instead, but it's still going to be super noisy here. Like I said, when prices are about to see tops, you'll see them in the trending words a lot. And when they're not seeing much interest, like right here, for example, that's a great sign that it's being passed over and the price could jump up at any moment with very little resistance. we're certainly not going to see price bottoms every time it's not trending, but it is a very good top indicator. And when you see an asset really starting to see a ton of trending words related to it, be careful. The mainstream is getting very involved, and that's usually a recipe for disaster, especially if prices are rising. Take a look at one other asset, like Dogecoin, very good example of how trending words can impact future price levels. You can see the highest one up to this point happened in April 2021, right before the early May local top, and the local top was swift and very hard to anticipate being able to get out, and sure enough, it fell off a cliff. We did see an even higher surge here in trending words right around the end of 2021. I'm not quite sure what it was related to. I know there was some meme coin talk at the end of 2021, about a month after Bitcoin and Ethereum hit their all-time highs, but it looks like the trending words are continuing to stay quite high for Dogecoin, and we'd ideally want it to come back down here as a signal that Dogecoin and meme coins in general. Someone was chatting. They may have just been talking to someone else in the room. But yeah, we want to see.
Sorry, I don't know. I'm sorry.
Of course, yeah. Go right ahead. No, please.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I wasn't meaning to talk, but I have one question, which is I really appreciate all these metrics, but there are just so many, right? And I kind of don't have all that much time as I would love to have. But what would be really neat for me is if there were any like pre-made curated dashboards, perhaps with some alert suggestions or capabilities as well. Is there anything like that you guys may have curated already?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to save it toward the end, but I'll show it now. I think it would be great to give you guys a quick look at the alerts section. So we can make alerts very easily for any asset or any watch list that we have. And I'm going to make a mock one for you guys right now. You can simply go over to your avatar over at the top right, click on that. You'll be sent to this page where you can see the amount of different alerts that are already preset. I believe we have a few social alerts within the templates here. So this one, for example, is a very, very helpful one. It's showing when there are certain assets within kind of a pre-made watch list, and when they are suddenly trending, essentially hitting a top 10 spot on the social trends countdown, which I will show here. I'll just back it up to social trends. It's going to be this link here. So if you go to app.sandman.net/dashboards/labs/trends, you can see the top 10 hottest rising words compared to their normal resting average. Right now, we can see that Trump is the number one discussed word, as he is being rumored to be running again in 2024, and there are some other political things related to him that are making headlines right now on crypto platforms. The CPI, which I believe is coming today, they're going to be announcing the CPI, I think in the next couple hours. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But these are basically the top 10, hashtags or full words that are seeing a big rise on social media, whether that be through Twitter, Discord, Reddit, Telegram, or some other pro traders chats like Bitcoin Talk. And then what we're doing with the alerts is it's showing anytime some of these key projects, this is just a random one that I think one of our staff members made because they're interested in Bitcoin, Cardano, the Sandbox, Vulcan Forge, PYR, Flux. And it's telling him or her whenever the one of those 5 or 6 assets are trending, and it'll just go straight to his phone within 5 minutes or so, whether it's via email or Telegram, to tell him that asset is now trending, whether it's because the price is plummeting or rising, or there's just some huge real news story about it. So we can recreate something like that. We can go to create alert. We'll just do one asset. I think that's easiest. It's going to tell us to select an asset. We'll just go with Bitcoin. We'll click on choose metric. We can go to social. We'll do something else, such as we'll do like a general social volume spike. And this is actually going to bring up a graph and tell us how often a social volume spike at the current set size is going to hit and give us an alert on that. So obviously, Bitcoin is talked about more than once per day. That's why you see a red dot on every single day over the last 90 days. But let's say we change that to 1,000. Let's go to 1,000,000. And now they're all gone. So let's try something like 100,000, 10,000. Now they're all back. Let's go in the middle, like 50,000. Still too high. Let's try 20,000. Okay, there we go. So now we can see that if the amount of mentions of Bitcoin exceeds 20,000, it's going to fire off. And that doesn't happen every day. It's happened 11 times in the past 3 months. And right now it's only checking on it on a once per day basis. We can switch that to something like hours, and then it'll be a little more precise in any specific hour that's seeing basically an average on like a on pace perspective of 20,000. That's when it's going to exceed here and fire off. We can also do something like less than 20,000, and that's going to be every day but the ones we just looked at, so 78 times in the past 3 months. We can do it in multiple hours instead. We could do it in less than 20,000 every 4 days. You can really mix and match that a lot. So I'll leave it at just like more than 20,000 per day for now. And then I'll go to the next screen. This tells me my email, whether I want it to go to Telegram, whether I want some push notifications. You have to actually click on this and go to enable notifications to make that work. You can also choose the frequency of how often you want these alerts to happen. If you only want it to fire off once per day, you can leave it as is. You can disable it after it triggers. So let's say you only want a one-time alert, and then just not worry about ever getting these alerts again. You can click this on. You can have the alert fire off minutely, hourly, daily, or weekly. So that gives you pretty much every time frame option under the sun to mix and match it, customize it to your liking. And you can even select whether you want it to be private or you want to share it with the Sandbase community so they can potentially set an alert similar to the one you just did. By default, for security and your own convenience, we leave it set as private. So then I can just click create alert, and it's suddenly going to be ready to go. And I can open it at any time and review it. And it's basically now linked to my Telegram. I believe I added setup that way, so that it's going to fire off and give me a little notification for any day that the social volume goes above 20,000. And that looks to be a pretty useful alert, considering it doesn't happen too often and likely only is happening during extreme scenarios in Bitcoin's price fluctuations. So whatever asset you're into, you can do it for that. You can do, I won't create any more, but you can do it for assets, watch lists of yours, greeners that you might have preset, or even specific wallet addresses. Like if there's a big wallet owned by a whale, where they're often associated with a big price fluctuation whenever they become active, that can be tremendously useful if you suddenly have a Telegram alert coming in saying, this Polkadot wallet that has been notorious for selling at the tops just fired off. you can quickly get to your computer and be like, I don't want to be in this asset right now, or I want to take some profit, because when they take profit or make a big move, prices tend to drop. So that's a very useful thing to have at your fingertips for sure. And like I said, there are so many different, being a little bit freezy right now. I'm clicking but not getting anything. But there's so many different metrics that you can look at that would be helpful for your ability to get some real-time alerts right before a big move happens, whether it's a social metric or just another on-chain metric, which we can save for another webinar. This page has gotten freezy, so apologize for that.
I have a question that might be related.
Totally.
I noticed that you can share your chart, the chart that you make
Uh-huh.
as well, but I'm not sure how to browse charts and find others.
Yeah. So when you say charts, are you referring specifically? Oh man, my whole.
No, I mean the charts tab. So when you choose, for example, price and a bunch of metrics on top.
Give me a moment. I can pull up what I think you're talking about, but Sandbase has gotten very freezy for me. I can't seem to move.
No, it's fine.
This is peculiar. Gary or anyone else, Alexi on the call, could you check to see if our server just went down? Maxim or Anastasia?
Invisible. Shift R.
For me,
Yeah, we tried it. Okay, I wonder if it was just getting overwhelmed, but once it allowed me to basically just end processes for all the pages, it was able to pull back up again. So sorry about that, guys. So yeah, the charts and sharing, let me see if I can find that. Explorer and go into charts here. I think this is just going to take us to some of the shared charts here. So this should be what you're talking about. It's right on app.santiment.net, and you'll see a lot of user-created charts, such as Lanky's long versus short chart here. And it'll bring up his created template that he wanted to share with the public. And we can instantly see the exact same time intervals that he chose, the metrics that he thinks are most relevant. It should even be related to the asset that he created the template for, which it looks like was Bitcoin. But that should be how you do it. It's just under app.santiment.net, and you go to Explore, click on Charts, and you'll see a few come up right away.
Is there any way to search by asset or person or something like that?
I'm not sure on that. Any other staff that are in the chat right now, if you know, feel free to mention it. I know you can click on show more and basically just see a pretty endless supply of user created charts here, and they'll usually just show what the asset is directly in the icon. But I don't know if you can sort specifically by the asset. If I do something
that would
like
be really interesting, of course. Thank you.
I agree. No, I think that's a great idea, and I can definitely suggest that to the team. But yeah, if I type in, really good question, and I'm sorry I don't have the answer. My hunch is that we don't have that capability right now, but if I do find out that we do, I will definitely share it with you after this call in the general chat, and I'll tag you so you can see it, okay?
All good.
But at minimum, I can tell you that you can find a ton of user-created charts here that can be very helpful to quickly get some ideas on what to study and check in on a day-to-day basis for your trading. A lot of them are really good, and you can even see, you can vote on it. and something that has like 10 likes, that likely means that another community member stumbled upon it and really liked what they created. So that might be an indication that it's relevant for trading strategies and something you might find useful. And you can, of course, if you don't think it's relevant, you can just click on hide and immediately get it off the list, so you don't stumble upon it in the future. You can copy the link and then type it in separately in your URL bar somewhere else. It's pretty intuitive and very helpful to find a lot of great charts. So great question there. Let's talk a little more about social trends, since we haven't really scraped it too much. So we talked about the top 10 countdown, but we can also look up a keyword such as, we'll look at a group of keywords such as buy the dip or buy dips. And we can see over time exactly how much the crowd is discussing this phenomenon of buying the dip and when people think it's a good time to do so. Now, we've covered this before, but generally speaking, this is going to come up the most, obviously, when there is a dip opportunity. And usually the crowd gets it wrong, and they'll say that it's time to buy a dip. You might see a temporary, very, very short relief in dip, in the price coming up and recovering from a dip. And then the long term is that it will go further and further down. If I go to the last year here, get a little more perspective, you can see this is a great example. This was the largest mention of buying the dip. It happened about 3 weeks after the all-time high, when people were used to seeing a big recovery from a dip pretty much any time a dip happened. So they were like, oh, no problem. This is the biggest dip we've seen in a long time. Just buy it and it'll go up. And we saw a very short-term indication that it was going to go back up, followed by a much larger drop down. Same here, this buy the dip spike seemed to work out pretty well. It went up for pretty much the next 2 weeks, then it came back down to pretty much the same spot it was at, but this time there weren't nearly as many people calling for it being time to buy the dip, and it was able to go up with much less resistance and mainstream attention. And a lot of people were FOMOing back in here, and then the price dropped off a cliff. People called for another dip buy opportunity right here after the huge drop in early to mid-May, and it never really came to fruition. Same here to a smaller extent. You'll notice that each one is kind of lesser than the last because the price is getting lower and lower over time. So there is less enthusiasm, as well as just less overall participants in discussing crypto at this time. And really, when there is a big dip and there isn't much discussion, like we see here, for example, in September 2021, not really anything special. No one's saying it's time to buy the dip at an increased rate. And boom, we suddenly see that rocket launch to a then all-time high. A little bit of interest in buying the dip. It stays kind of flat. And then one more true all-time high that occurred in early to mid-November. So that's a cool thing to look at. You can also just type in an asterisk here in the social context page, and it's going to bring up every single social volume message, regardless of topic. So you can actually see the overall involvement and discussion rate related to crypto or just any topic on crypto platforms over time. You can see the biggest spike actually occurred right before the huge drop from the FOMC's decision to drop it, to increase interest rates, I should say, by 0.5%. A ton of extra social volume came in when the mainstream decided this was the first minor dip that they could buy and start to dip their toes into crypto. And you can see that it didn't go too well for them after the big uptick. So a lot less people talking about crypto prior to the big rise, and then when the big rise peaks, suddenly everyone is in it and the price drops and the whales are able to flush their profit with ease to the smaller unknowing crypto traders. One more that could be useful, we could look at something. Notice that we have plenty of suggested potentials, like McAfee dies. This was, of course, the time that McAfee died. And actually, no, I'm sorry. This was long after he died, but there was some increased attention to his death at this time. Bitcoin Pizza Day, interesting to see that back in late May. BTC correction, how much the mainstream is paying attention to a big price drop, sort of similar to buy the dip, but not quite the same. Robinhood going to IPO. Powell, of course, being a prominent figure in the Fed. So when he's being talked about, it's likely related to inflation and the CPI reports coming out. DCA, how much the smart money and the intelligent investors are interested in dollar cost averaging. Hack, so when there's a big increase in hacks going on, either to many personal wallets or a huge exchange hack, that's when this is discussed a lot. You can even just look at something like the word short and how much people are interested in actually betting against the market instead of for the market. And you can also, by the way, scroll down and see the individual discussion rates by platform, whether it be Telegram, Reddit, Twitter. And that could be very interesting too, as you see, if I go back to buy the dip and go down, you can see how different platforms view dips in different, wildly different ways over time. And that can be very useful as well. So that's a recap on the social trends and social context dashboard. Do you guys have any final questions you'd like to bring up while we're all still here and we are about to conclude?
Yeah, I asked a question in the feature requests, and I'm not sure how easy it is to discern what I mean, but I like the supply distribution by address and by balance for Bitcoin especially, and it would be really interesting to separate that into other kinds of categories, so not just the balance or but their P&L, so you can see when those who are in profit increase their position or decrease it, and likewise with those that are not in profit.
Yeah, that's a good request. This isn't exactly a social volume, a social metric, but I can show you really quick. We do have the ratio of volume and profit to loss. So this shows how many transactions are going on at any given time and whether that address that made the transaction was already in profit or in a loss at that time. This is showing the ratio between how many of those transactions at any given time were happening in profit versus at a loss. And as you would expect, when there's a high ratio of profit compared to loss, that's when tops tend to form. When it's low, it's more correlated with bottoms. It's more of a top indicator, I'd say, than bottom indicator, but that should be pretty similar to what you're referring to. I would recommend checking out that metric. We also
I use it. That's where this idea came from.
Yeah, so you might be talking. It's kind of a combination of that and network realized profit loss. Have you checked out network realized profit loss?
I found the MVRVs to be more easy to read, but go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree. I think MVRV is, in a vacuum, a little bit more useful, and this one gets more in the weeds. But essentially, this is measuring when there is a huge deficit overall on the network, and that's coming from addresses that are suddenly making a big trade while in profit or capitulating and getting out because they don't want to lose any more. And generally, when you see these huge negative spikes, just like with MVRV, but in a more noisy fashion, that's going to be indicative of bottoms being more likely, and these huge spikes being more indicative of tops being more likely.
All right, thanks.
For sure, yeah. I think maybe this is pretty close to what you're describing, not exactly, but maybe we can talk more in the chat and figure out how we might be able to create the metric that you're referring to, because I think it sounds really cool and something we could certainly work on.
Sure.
Appreciate the question. Any other things you guys want to bring up? right. Well, then we will stop it here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and participating in this webinar. I super appreciate it, and we'll have plenty more coming up. We have a pro webinar coming up for our Sandbase Pro members in 2 weeks, and then I think we'll be doing another webinar about 4 weeks from now. So tune in for that one. We'll let you know what the topic is shortly, and stay safe and happy trading in the meantime, everyone. Talk to y'all soon.